Hey folks, welcome back to Canada's Boxing Channel. I hope everyone's doing well. Thank God it's Friday, for those of you who get the weekend off. For those of you who have to work the weekend, you have my sympathy. This week, or roughly this week, I've done a series of videos. One I called Boxing and the Badge, which is how sometimes police officers have had a really positive influence on boxing. I then did one, Boxing and the Mob, which is a very well-known story, and I just really scratched the surface just to remind people that organized criminal groups have had an influence in boxing for a very, very long time. And I thought today, again, this is like a series, I would do one which shows how boxing has saved people from the criminal past. And I'm calling it How Boxing Saved Felons. And I thought that this was an interesting subject. We all know that sometimes sports, but in particular boxing, has really saved people. And it's given people a sense of purpose. And it's allowed people to maybe focus on natural aggression into a sporting event rather than antisocial behavior that's in many cases led to people making terrible mistakes in their lives. So, without further ado, and this isn't in any chronological order, I've made some notes because I'd never keep this in my head otherwise. I thought I would talk about at least 5 or 6, and there will be lots more, of course, but 5 or 6 sort of well-known and maybe some not so well-known instances where people have had their lives turned around by boxing, which has, of course, been a very positive thing. So the first one, excuse me, the first person I'd like to talk about is Bernard Hopkins. Now, Bernard Hopkins was sentenced to jail for armed robbery, and he was convicted, served almost 5 years. He was actually sentenced to 18 years. He rediscovered boxing inside prison and refocused his life, which is a great thing. He went on to become a great champion. A textbook, really, redemption through discipline type story. So hats off to Bernard Hopkins, who, because of boxing, was able to turn his life around and become a very famous champion, make lots of money, and live the life that would have been denied to him otherwise. The second individual is none other than the great Sonny Liston. Now, Sonny Liston is one of my favorite boxers of all time. He's a heavyweight champion, of course, famously lost to Muhammad Ali. But prior to then, he had absolutely cleaned out the division. There's a video in my playlists about Sonny Liston, and he destroyed Floyd Patterson twice. And Floyd Patterson was no pushover either. You look at the Floyd Patterson-George Chuvalo fight, and you see that Floyd Patterson was a very, very tough guy. But anyhow, Sonny Liston was an absolute monster. Treated very badly, I think, and interestingly, found peace when he visited Britain and Sweden. But in his home country, I think Sonny Liston got a very short end of a very, very dirty stick in many cases. But he had a long history of run-ins with the law as a youth and as a young adult. He had arrests, stints in juvenile, stints in jail. And of course, he was associated, according to some people, with organized crime. Boxing gave Sonny Liston a way out of that. And for a period of time, Sonny Liston was able to live the life that he really deserved. He, of course, died under very mysterious circumstances. So how much he was able to completely separate himself from some of the seedier types remains open to speculation. The next person I'd like to talk about is James Scott. He spent much of his life in prison. He was paroled, and then he was arrested for armed robbery and murder. He formed, excuse me, please. He formed the Rahway State Boxing Association in Rahway State Prison. And he actually, while in prison, became a highly regarded light heavyweight contender while still serving his sentence. So boxing provided a status, a structure, while he was actually incarcerated. He served, a tremendously long time. I think he served 28 years in total. But while he was incarcerated, boxing clearly saved him from possibly just, mentally dying inside and physically collapsing inside, so boxing gave him an outlet. And again, I think, boxing was a really positive influence on him. The next person to talk about really is Mike Tyson. Now, Mike Tyson had a violent past. He then became the youngest heavyweight champion. He then served time for a rape conviction. And if you were alive at the time, like I was, his fall was shocking. It really was. It was one of boxing's biggest stories, the fall of Mike Tyson. People thought, there's no way Mike Tyson's going to go to prison. He did. He was convicted of the rape of Desiree Washington. However, after prison, boxing helped Mike Tyson re-establish himself. He regained the heavyweight title briefly, and then he later reinvented himself as a media person, coaching, public speaking, podcaster. And I think it's fair to say that most people now have a fairly positive view of Mike Tyson, whereas many people, had it not been for boxing, might have just written Mike Tyson off. Another person, excuse me, is Ron Lyle. Now, Ron Lyle famously fought Muhammad Ali in 1975 for the world heavyweight title and had possibly the best heavyweight clash of all time when he and George Foreman met. But Ron Lyle served 7 years for second-degree murder, and he was stabbed in prison, nearly died, and in solitary confinement, he learned how to box. And apparently he did 1,000 push-ups a day in solitary. So boxing gave him that ability to focus and to turn his life around. And of course, Ron Lyle ended up as being, I was going to say, one of the great heavyweights of the 1970s. But that's hard. Because the 1970s had so many great fighters, I'm not sure if we would use the word great, but an absolute top contender in the 1970s. And a person who, I think, had he been boxing in almost any other era other than the 1970s, would probably have been a world heavyweight champion. Excuse me. There's another individual called Michael Katsidis. He was Australian, had legal problems down under, and then after serving a relatively short sentence, he turned his life around, and he works now mentoring young boxers. And he uses his story to inspire and help other people. So again, that's a very laudable thing to do. Now, I'm not going to say that boxing erases crimes or makes a victim's pain any less. And there are real consequences to criminal activity. But for many of these men that I've just mentioned, the community of boxing, the discipline, and the job of boxing gave them a second chance that had boxing not existed, they might never have gotten. and they might never have been able to break themselves free of that life of crime. I'm sure that there are lots of other examples. These are just a few. And if you can think of other famous examples, please let me know in the comments section. But I think it's fair to say that, the influence of boxing was such a positive for some of these folks that it really, really helped them. And it's something that as fans of boxing, we should recognize the positive things about the sport that we love so much. So there we go. This is my last in the series. So we had boxing and the badge, boxing and the mob, and how boxing saved felons. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know. And if you can, please subscribe. And if you can, please hit that little thumbs up like thing. And I'll see you on the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.